Hi, everyone. My name is Mario Mihalcic. I am one of the international student advisors at the Bechtel International Center. Today's presentation is specifically about the OPT application for fall graduates. So those of you with a degree conferral date of January 6th. I have a PowerPoint presentation that I'm going to share with you. As I'm going along, if you have questions, you can put those in the Q&A. I may answer those as I'm going along. If not, I will answer it at the end of the presentation. And I know some of you have already put some questions into the Q&A, but I think I'm going to stop at the part of the presentation where we talk about choosing your employment dates, because there's always a lot of questions around that. So let's go ahead and get started. And make this bigger. And let me bring up the Q&A. Okay. All right, so this is part one of a two-part presentation on the post-completion optional practical training application. This session is being recorded, and you'll find these slides on our webpage, on our post-OPT page. I'm going to be focusing on the application itself. I'm going to talk some about the online filing as well, which I think many of you are already aware that is an option for you to do. And then we're going to drill down on the actual I-765, the paper version of that I-765, not the online version. We have a lot of information about post-OPT on our website, including a number of resources. This video will also be posted, linked to on our website. So if you haven't been to our post-completion OPT page, this is a good time to do that. On that page too, we have several resources that you can use when completing your OPT application. These resources are directed to the paper application, not the online filing. That includes a USCIS checklist. That'll be the documents that you need to put together for your application, the tips for filling out the I-765, and then a final review checklist. So the reason why we're doing this today is because today is 100 days before degree conferral date. Today is the earliest day that you can start the OPT application process. Part two of this presentation will be on October 8th. October 8th is 90 days before your degree conferral date. October 8th is the earliest that you can mail your application to USCIS or submit it online. So part two of this application will be at the 90-day mark on October 8th. It's going to be more informal and more like a group advising session. You can bring your completed application with you, and we'll be going through the paper application document by document, and I'll take all your questions so you can do a final review together with me. We do not do individual reviews of applications anymore. We have the final review checklist on our website. We have a video that's a version of the final review checklist, and then this October 8th session. This is standard information about how to reach us for assistance through email, afternoon advising via Zoom, which is now Monday through Friday from 1 to 4 by appointment. And then we have also brought back afternoon walk-in advising. No appointments necessary. Just come to the assembly room, which is, you should know where that is, at the Bechtel International Center, and there'll be an advisor there Monday through Friday from 1 to 4 p.m. So a little bit about online versus paper filing, and then like I said, I do have a section on specifically about online filing. It is an option now through USCIS. We have been waiting to get feedback from other institutions and other students who have already used the online filing to figure out where the problems might lie. And so I think we have a good sense of some of the issues that you would have to avoid if you're going to file online. But we are still building out kind of our advising. tip sheets and things like that on online filing. So I suspect by the winter quarter we'll be primarily advising students on using the online filing system, but for this fall quarter, we're still advising doing the paper filing. The one thing to note, and this gets mentioned on the next slide as well, is that you have to be in the US when you're either mailing your application to USCIS or if you're submitting it online. In either case, you have to be in the US at that time when you're putting your application in the mail to USCIS or if you're submitting it online. You cannot apply for OPT from outside of the US. And again, this big warning here, make sure if you're not in the US now, or if you're planning to travel, that you are in the US at the time that you are mailing your application to USCIS or submitting it online. All right, so this is our post-OPT application timeline. And let's talk about, we talked about already the degree conferral date for you as fall graduates is January 6, 2022. So your post-OPT application revolves around that degree conferral date. That is your program end date on your I-20. If it's not, it will be changed to January 6, 2022 on your I-20 when you apply for the post-OPT endorsement. Again, today is the earliest that you can start the OPT application process. So today is the first day that you can request the OPT endorsement of your I-20. And you'll be doing that through Bechtel Connect. 90 days from your degree conferral date is October 8th, as I mentioned earlier. That's the earliest that you can mail your OPT application to USCIS or submit it to them online. Your requested start date of employment when you make the OPT endorsement request has to fall within the 60-day grace period following your degree conferral date. So your employment start date that you're requesting when you make the OPT endorsement request through Bechtel Connect has to be set sometime between January 7th, 2022 and March 6th, 2022. So students will often ask, when should I put as my start date? That usually students will make that determination based on whether or not they already have a job offer. So some students know that they will be starting work right after degree conferral, and they'll put a January 7th start date. If you're going to put an early start date like that, then you do want to make sure that you follow the timelines and apply as early in the 90-day window as possible, not sooner. So if you know you want to start working on January 7th, and that's going to be your requested start date, you definitely want to be mailing your application on October 8th or a few days after to give yourself the best opportunity to get the EAD card from USCIS. USCIS traditionally takes 90 days to process an application, whether it's submitted online or by paper, but they can take longer. So again, if you want to start working soon after degree conferral, you're going to be mailing that application on October 8th or just after, or submitting it online. If you're not sure when you want to start working, or you don't have a job yet, you might want to set that start date for employment in February. So maybe 30 days into the degree conferral. And the reason why you're doing that is because if you do get a job offer after you've applied for OPT, then you won't be able to start working, and you can't change that start date from the day that you set it. So if you set February 1st as your start date and you got a job offer, they really want you to start on January 15th, you can't do that. And you can't change your requested start date after you've mailed your application to USCIS. So your start date will remain February 1st in that example. So if you're absolutely not sure about finding a job and you don't want to use up all your 90 days of unemployment that you get under OPT, because you're allowed to be unemployed for up to 90 days while you're on OPT in total. If you exceed those 90 days of unemployment, your OPT ends. So if you're really not sure that you're going to be able to find a job and you want to give yourself the maximum amount of time after degree conferral to find that job, maybe you set your requested start date to the beginning of March, something like March 1st. And then that will give you 2 months after degree conferral, plus you get those 90 days of unemployment to keep looking for a job. A lot of my students at the other university and college that I worked at would do that because there were smaller schools, so it was harder for them to find jobs. So they would put a start date that was closer to the end of the 60-day grace period. I'm not sure how it is for you as Stanford students to be concerned about being able to find a job. The other reason students will put a later start date is if they want to build in vacation time. So if you put a start date of, let's say, February 20th, and you get a job offer and the company really wants you to start, you legally can't start until February 20th because that's the date that will be on your EAD card. It's the date that you requested. And then that, provides you, I don't want to say an excuse, but it builds in some vacation time, a break between when you finished your degree and when you need to start working. So some students like that. So that's generally how students will choose what requested start date to place. Will be whether or not I already have a job offer and I've worked out a start date, whether or not I think I might, but I'm not entirely sure, and I don't have a job offer, and I'm really not sure I'm gonna be able to find a job, or I wanna build in a legal reason to be able to take a break between when my degree is conferred and when I start working. Having said that, again, once you've made your requested start date in Bechtel Connect as part of your OPT endorsement request, and you've mailed your application to USCIS, that start date cannot change. And every quarter we get emails from students saying, oh, I want to move my start date to a later day because my job fell through, or I want to move it up because I found a job. Once your application is with USCIS, that start date cannot change. So let's see if we have any questions about that. Let's see. A question about traveling. We'll save that for the end. All right. So question, what will happen if the OPT review takes longer than expected and is not completed by the start date? So if let's say you set a start date of January 7th, but you didn't you didn't make the endorsement request until November, you didn't mail off your application until November to USCIS, or there's a delay in the processing of the OPT application. As a courtesy, USCIS has been moving the start date, the employment start date on the EAD card closer to when the card is produced. So let's say you put January 7th, but for some reason your application gets delayed, the processing gets delayed, and now it's February, and they're producing the card at the end of January, they'll move your start date to the end of January. They do that as a courtesy. It's not guaranteed they will do that, but I've never seen them not do that. Can you start working after the start date? Yes. So if your employment start date is, let's say, January 10th, and then you start working on January 15th, that's okay. You can't start working before the employment start date on your EAD card. You can start working on or after the start date of employment on that EAD card, but not before. So there's a question about how late can you apply for OPT? You can apply for OPT within the grace period. So even after degree conferral, as long as they get your application before the end of the grace period, you can still apply for OPT. The only thing with that is the longer you wait to apply, the longer you'll have to wait to get that EAD card. And OPT, if you haven't used any of it while under pre-completion OPT, then you get the full 12 months, but you have to use those 12 months within 14 months of degree conferral. The bottom line of all that is the longer you wait to apply for OPT, the longer after degree conferral you'll be waiting to work. And again, you can't apply for OPT once your 60-day grace period has ended, but hopefully none of you are going to be waiting that long to apply for OPT. When does the 12-month ticking clock start? At that point, so you get 12 months of OPT from the start date of your employment on the EAD card to the end date. So that's the 12 months. So when you request your start date of employment, the end date will be 1 year minus a day. So if you request January 7th, 2022 as your start date of employment, your end date will be January 6th, 2023. And again, that's assuming you didn't do any pre-completion OPT, which most of you have not done. Can we start working after the start date in the form if the OPT review takes longer? No, you cannot start working under OPT until you get the EAD card in your hand. Once you have that EAD card in your hand and you've reached the start date of employment on that EAD card is when you can start working. You cannot start. So if you put a request the start date of January 7th and January 7th comes around, but you haven't gotten the EAD card yet, you cannot start working. A couple of PhD questions, I'll save that for the end as well, because PhD students have some flexibility in terms of applying for OPT. Okay, so applying for OPT is a 4-step process. The first step is to apply to graduate. The second step is to request the OPT endorsed I-20. And then the third step is to put your application together using the USCIS checklist, and then doing a final review of your application and then mailing it to USCIS. So apply to graduate, request your OPT endorsed I-20, and then once you get the OPT endorsed I-20 on October 8th, you can mail your application, start mailing your application to USCIS. You will use Bechtel Connect to request your endorsement. And again, today is 100 days before your degree conferral date. So if you haven't done so already, after this presentation, you can go online to Bechtel Connect and request the OPT endorsement. It's going to be under the student category under employment, optional practical training. You're going to click start new request. If for some reason you can't submit it at the time that you are making the request, don't start a new request. You can continue your existing request. I'm going to minimize the Q&A because it's in my way. So you'll click on I have a student ID and password, and then request 2021. Just because your OPT is starting in 2022, this is still a 2021 request. These are the boxes that come up on the overview page. The first box is just information about the OPT. You have to click on box 2 to review the training resources that we have for you. Box 4 will be an attestation. And then 5A and B is where you're going to enter your information. So box 2, again, you're going to mark as read. And you're going to then sign it digitally. So okay. Yeah, box 4 is the attestation. All right, so in 5A, box 5A, the OPT employment information, this is where you're going to enter your requested start dates. This actually I used when I did the summer OPT presentation. So just ignore the dates there, that was for them. But you'll enter your start date, your end date. You're gonna tell us whether it's full-time. You should only be applying for full-time OPT. You're applying for post-completion OPT, and then you're gonna enter in the student remarks employment in the field of whatever your major was or is. 5B, it says post-OPT employer information. However, OPT is not employment-based, and you will not actually be entering your employer information, even if you have a job lined up and ready to go. You're gonna be reporting that employment after the start date on your EAD card, and you're gonna do that directly to the US government through this thing called an Scvp portal. What you're doing here for the post-employer information is affirm that you are applying for post-OPT, and then you're gonna be uploading the screenshot that you submitted or applied for graduation. You don't actually have to get a notification that you are graduating. All we need to see is that you applied for graduation. So again, even though it says post-OPT employer information, what you're doing is just uploading a screenshot of that you submitted your graduation application. So let me just answer this quick question. Should we request today if we're graduating June 2022? So hopefully you understand that you can't start the OPT application process more than 100 days before your degree conferral date. If you're not graduating until June 2022, then this is way too early to be applying for OPT. This presentation is specifically for fall graduates. Okay. So once you've gone through all the boxes as you're going along, they get checked, showing that they've been completed. Then you hit the submit button at the top of the page, and then you'll get the message that your OPT application has been received or completed, and then it'll tell you that the processing time for us to endorse your OPT application is 5 to 10 business days. And you have successfully completed your I-20 endorsement request. Okay. So now let's take a look at the application packet that you're going to be putting together for USCIS. Again, I'm going to be advising on doing the paper filing of the application. It's slightly different in terms of what documents you're putting together for the online application, and I'll get into that a little bit later in this presentation. But right now I'm going to focus on as if you're filing this by mail. So this is the paper-based filing. You're going to have your cover letter. You're going to have the actual Form I-765, which is the application itself. You'll have a Form G1145. That is a one-page request form. It's just going to ask for your name and your email address, and that's so that way you can get notifications by email. You'll include a photocopy of your OPT endorsed I-20. You're going to include photocopies of all your previous I-20s that you have in your possession. You're going to include a photocopy of the passport bio page. And then you're going to include a photocopy of the F1 visa page in your passport. That's also known as the visa stamp. That's not the admission stamp, that's the actual stamp on your visa page. If you're Canadian, you're not going to have that visa stamped in your passport. So if you're from Canada, you're just going to be making a photocopy of your passport bio page. You're going to print out your most recent I-94, and you're going to include that in your application. If you were approved for OPT in the past under a lower degree level, then you'll include a photocopy of that EAD card from that OPT application. And then you're also going to include a check or money order for the application fee. You should always go to the USCIS I-765 website and make sure that you are paying the correct fee. I checked earlier today and it was $410. You do not include the biometrics fee as part of that. So don't overpay the application fee. But again, I always advise students to check the I-765 website for the most current filing fee before mailing their application to USCIS. And then you'll also include 2 US passport size photos. This is the sample cover letter from that's linked on our USCIS checklist page. You will determine where you're mailing your application based on whether or not you're going to mail it through the US Postal Service, or if you're going to use FedEx or UPS to mail your application. It goes to 2 different addresses. So the first thing you're going to want to decide is if you're going to use the US Postal Service or use FedEx or UPS. I do not advise students to use the US Postal Service. I do advise students to use either FedEx or UPS, just because the Postal Service is kind of going through some reorganization. Whichever way you mail it, you want to mail it with a tracking number. So that way you know exactly when your application to USCIS was delivered. If you're using the US Postal Service, you don't want to have somebody there or request somebody to sign it upon delivery. If you're using the US Postal Service, you're just going to mail it express so you get that tracking number. That tracking number is very important. So make sure that you keep that tracking number. The portions in green are where you're going to enter information dependent on your situation, your personal information. And then the bottom that's highlighted in yellow are for students who will be mailing the card, not to their address, but to a friend, trusted friend or family member's address, or a different mailing address like a PO box, because it's just a way of kind of highlighting to USCIS that your mailing address is different from your physical location. I see a lot of good questions. I'm going to circle back to those questions at the end of the presentation. So some tips for when you're putting your application together. You're going to write your I-94 number in black ink on the following documents. At the top of these documents, your OPT endorsed I-20, the top copy of your previous I-20s. So your previous I-20s, you're going to have paper clipped together. Just on the top copy of the previous I-20s, you'll write your I-94 number. The photocopy of your passport bio page, the photocopy of your F1 visa page, and in the memo line of the personal check or money order, you'll be writing your I-94 number on there. If you look at our post OPT video about the application, it looks like we're saying put post-it notes and write your I-94 number on the post-it note. That's not what it looks like. I guess that's what it does look like, but actually what you're doing is you're writing your I-94 number on the actual copy. So again, the top of the OPT endorsed I-20, the top of the first copy of your previous I-20, photocopy of your passport bio page, photocopy of your F1 visa page, and then the memo line of your personal check or money order. We don't suggest using ink when you're writing on the back of your photos. So on the back of your photos, you want to gently write in pencil your name and your I-94 number, and that's because they're small. They're passport size photos. In case they get separated from your application, they'll be able to match your photos to your application if for some reason it gets separated. Photocopies can be either in black and white or color, doesn't matter to USCIS. We do recommend doing single-sided copies, and that's because they're going to take your application and run it through a scanner. So if it's single-sided, it makes it easier on them. The rule of thumb is the less they have to think about your application, the better off you are. You want to use paper clips. You should not be stapling any of your documents together. And it's for that same reason, because they're going to be scanning them. So if they're stapled, they have to pull the staples out. Just use paper clips. They can just pull the paper clip off. When you're in terms of the section about your previous I-20s, you want to make photocopies of any previous I-20s that you have in your possession. USCIS is mostly interested in your previous I-20s that have CPT endorsement or a prior OPT endorsement. And that's especially true for the online filing, because they have a section just for those I-20s. So if you're freaked out because you don't have all your previous I-20s, you really, really want the ones that have the CPT endorsement or prior OPT endorsement. Otherwise, just include whatever I-20s you have, make photocopies of those and put those as part of your application. Again, always verify the fee payment amount. I've had a number of students whose OPT applications got returned because they overpaid the fee. They included the biometrics. I had one student who submitted 2 forms of payment. There's a USCIS form if you want to pay by credit card, which we don't advise doing. Students submitted that and a check in case the credit card didn't go through. They rejected the application. They can only accept one form of payment, but please verify that amount before you mail your application to USCIS. And again, we don't advise using a credit card. There's too many potential problems. And also, if you send a personal check as part of your application fee payment, you can see that your application is being processed because that check has been cashed. If you don't have a personal check, you can use a cashier. You can get a money order or cashier's check from your bank, but that's just like cash, and so you won't know that it was actually cashed. So now let's look at the I-765. So this is the actual application itself for a USCIS. You always, when you're doing actually this is the nice thing about the online application is you don't have to worry about the form being the correct edition. But I've printed out, I can't see because of the background, but I printed out the application. The edition that they're using down at the bottom is marked as August 25th, 20, with an expiration date of July 31st, 2022. The students applying for the STEM extension, a few of them had problems because they'll just take the I-765 that they did for their post-OPT, change it up for the STEM extension parts and mail it in, but then the edition gets changed. And so they got their STEM extension applications rejected because they used an old edition of the application. The first thing you notice, and the question that most students have, has to do with typing or printing N/A in the fields that don't apply to them, or typing or printing none in the numerical fields that don't apply to them. That is more of an art than it is a science. I have not had or seen an OPT application get rejected because the student put in N/A in all the fields, or did some fields and not other fields, or didn't put in N/A. I would not advise not putting in N/A, but I've not seen an application get rejected because the N/A wasn't entered correctly. You will check the box for 1A, initial permission to accept employment. Your full legal name should match your name as it appears on your I-20 and your passport. If you've gone by any other version of your name, let's say at Stanford or driver's license, or you were married and your name changed, or got divorced and your name changed, then that'll go in the other names used section. If you have a nickname that your friends use, that would not be something you'd put in an other names used section. And then for the fields where you don't fill in for the other names used, you'll put in N/A. Right. So the thing to note on part 2 here is the address section. So 5A through 6 is asking about your US mailing address. So if your EAD card is not going to be mailed to where you're physically located now, then you're going to be entering the address of where you want your EAD card and other communications sent to by USCIS. Whatever address you're using as your mailing address should be valid for the next 6 months. If you're going to be moving, then you'll want to use somebody's address that you trust, who will be there to receive your OPT EAD card. Or if you're not sure where you might be and the address where you're currently staying at, you won't be there for the next 6 months, then maybe you want to get a PO box. Also, if you're an undergrad and you've been affected by this new mail delivery system that Stanford has come up with, you probably don't want to be using your Stanford mailing address for the EAD card. You'll probably want to either use a friend or family member that you trust to get your EAD card, use that as your mailing address, or just go down to the post office in Palo Alto and get a PO box. The EAD card is it's not difficult to replace, but it is time consuming. It does require another application to USCIS, and you do have to pay the $410 application fee again. So you just want to be really sure that the address that you're putting as your mailing address for the EAD card is will be valid for the next 6 months, and there will be somebody there to receive your mail. If your mailing address is different from where your physical address is, so where you are living at the point that you're filling this application out, which again should be in the US, then you put your US physical address there. So in 8 and 9, you're going to leave those blank. Contrary to the N/A or none instructions, you leave 8 and 9 blank. The rest on that column is pretty self-explanatory. If you have a social security number, you'll check yes and enter your social security number. If you don't, you can check no. You can use this application to apply for a social security number if you want to. Every quarter, there seems to be somebody who has a problem with not getting the social security number, so they'll get the EAD card and not the social security number. In that case, that you would have to go to the Social Security office to follow up with them about what happened to your request for that number. But you can use the I-765 to apply for a Social Security number. If you have the number and not the card, because the card got lost, I would not suggest you use this application to get the card. Just find a way to get to the Social Security office and request a duplicate card through them. If you have a Social Security number and you're not you're not applying for it here, you'll just put N/A in the father's name and the mother's name section. Country of citizenship, for most of you, you'll just use 18A, and then in 18B, you'll write N/A. Unless you have a citizenship in another country, then you'll use 18B to list that other country. place of birth is pretty self-explanatory. Some people don't have a state or province of birth, or might not have a city or town. In that case, you'll put N/A in that box. For the travel document number, if you have a passport, you write none in 21C. Your eligibility category for 27, since you're applying for post-completion OPT, will be C3B. So you write C3B in that field, and then the rest of that section does not apply to you. So 28 applies for the STEM extension. If you're STEM eligible and when you're applying for the STEM extension, you use 28. Otherwise, for 27, you enter C3B, and then the rest of that column doesn't apply to you. Again, you'll be entering N/A into those fields, and the yes and no check boxes, you just leave those alone. You don't write anything next to them, and you don't check them off. So again, the fields that don't apply to you, you just write N/A. So let's see. For the applicant's statement, you'll check 1A. You can read and understand English. Then you enter your contact information in 3 through 6 in that column 2. So here's the signature in 7A. This is not a common, but this is one of the errors that will get a student's application rejected. When you sign in that box, your signature cannot be touching any of the lines of that box. It has to be free floating in that box, because what happens is they're going to scan your signature and put it on the EAD card. Now, as far as I understand, for the online application, there's no signature that you're doing that gets scanned onto the EAD card, as far as I know. But here for the paper version, when you sign in 7A, do not touch any of the lines. If you touch the lines, your application will get rejected and sent back to you. So absolutely make sure that you're not touching any of the lines in 7A when you're signing it. So part 4 through part 5 is the interpreter's contact information. All those fields you're going to be putting in N/A, or in the numeric fields, none. So that's part 4 and part 5. Here on this last page, part 6, if you had a previous CVIS ID number, so you went to a different school, or you were endorsed for CPT, or you were endorsed for OPT, you will list that information here. If you look at our tip sheet on this slide, you'll see the order of how you enter that information. So every time you are endorsed for CPT, you're going to list that here. You'll start with your CVIS ID number. You're going to list whether the CPT was for part-time or full-time, the dates that you were authorized for, and the degree level. You want to make sure that your name appears in 1A through 1C. Sometimes it automatically shows up. It's pre-populated. You don't have to worry about 2. And then once you've entered that information, you have to sign and date somewhere on the page. We suggest using that 7D section to sign and date it. And when you're listing your previous CVIS ID number, if you have one, or your CPT endorsements or a previous OPT endorsement, the page number, part number, and item number, so 3A, 3B, and 3C will be 3, 2, and 27, because that's what that information is referring to. If you don't have any information to enter on this page, you still have to include it with your OPT application. I have had students who did not include part 6 because it's blank, I don't need it. Their applications got rejected and sent back to them. If it's a pre-populated page, again, I go back to my rule of thumb, the less they have to think about your application, the better off you are. If they see your name, there might be an expectation that there should have been information on this page. Just print out a blank part 6 and include that with your application. All right, that's the I-765. Again, today you'll be making your endorsement request through using Bechtel Connect. And then while you're waiting for us to make the endorsement and process that, you can be putting your application together, filling out the I-765 with the information I just provided. And then we'll all come back together on October 8th at 1 p.m. to do a review of your application before you mail it off. And hopefully all of you know that October 8th is the first day that you can mail your application to USCIS. You cannot mail your application to USCIS before October 8th. If you don't want to come back for that session, we have the final review checklist on our website as both a PDF and a video version of that. So next, I'm going to talk about online filing. Before I do that, let me just take a peek at the Q&A. Okay. All right, here's one about the I-765. Should the C3B be put in the first box or should it be C in the, okay, let me go back to that really quick and clarify that. Okay, so in item 27, the first box is going to be C, the second box will be 3, the third box will be B. So that's the order that you're going to put it in. So you're not going to combine those into one box. So box 1 will be C, box 2 will be 3, the third box will be B. Let's see if there's anything specific to the I-765. Okay. If we don't have CPT, then should we leave the entire part 6 blank? Yes, if you don't have CPT and you weren't previously endorsed for OPT, didn't have a different CVIS ID number at some other point in your life, then you leave part 6 blank. But make sure to include it with your application. Okay. So let's talk about online filing. And we've just started building out our advising on the online filing tips, and for the winter quarter graduates, we probably will be advising on online filing. If you go to the I-765 USCIS webpage, they are really pushing online filing. I've talked to students who have done the online, Stanford students who have done online filing. They said it was pretty easy to get through. And I did see another school post that online filing is taking longer for USCIS to process than the paper filing. I don't necessarily believe that because USCIS is not transparent in the processing of these OPT applications. So if you decide to do the online filing, a couple of things to watch out for. Don't file online without receiving the OPT endorsed I-20. There have been students, in fact, there has been one Stanford student and other students at other universities who have submitted the online application because it's there. It was easy for them to do, but they didn't have the OPT endorsement on their I-20 when they filed it. So make sure you don't do anything online until you get that OPT endorsed I-20. Don't file online more than 90 days before your program conferral, before your degree conferral date, the program end date on your I-20. Again, because it's going to be easier to do online, you might be tempted to submit that on October 7th or October 6th because you already got the OPT endorsed I-20 from us. Don't do that. You also have to watch out because the online system uses the UTC, or Coordinated Universal Time, not Pacific Standard Time. So if you're like super anxious to get your OPT application in and you wait till 12:01 a.m. on October 8th, you may not be submitting it in the right time zone. So you still might want to give it a few days after October 8th to submit the application online. If you have one name, you're going to list that name as your last name, so you wouldn't be using the first name field. And then also, you will be paying online the application fee. That payment has to be made, if you're doing like a direct payment, it has to be made through a US financial institution. It can't be through a foreign bank account. And if you're going to be using a credit card, it has to be a credit card issued by a US financial institution. It can't be a credit card issued by a foreign bank. So keep that in mind. And there's no cover letter necessary for the online application. You go to myaccount.uscis.gov, you click on My USCIS, and then from there, you'll click on File a Form Online. And then you'll select the I-765 Application for Employment Authorization. You'll then go through the I-765. There's it should be pretty similar, should be asking the same things that the paper version asks you. So all the stuff that I reviewed on the paper version should be there as part of the application. It's just I think they use logic for some of these questions, so you might not see some of the questions that you see on the paper version just because it'll skip past those questions. And again, you'll be selecting C3B, the Student Post-Completion OPT. There's an evidence section. You will need to scan 2 US passport style photos. Actually, I'm not sure it's 2. It says US passport style photos. Photo has to be taken within the last 6 months. That's also true for your paper OPT application. These have to be recent passport style photos. There was a student I was talking to last week who used a mobile app to do that. And he's saying he had to pay for the premium version so that he could change out the white background on that. And his OPT application was approved. So there's probably different ways that you can do the passport style photo when you're doing this online version. You do have to include a scan of your Form I-94, PDF of that. And then there'll be a section asking you about employment authorization document. You will need to upload a copy of your passport and the visa stamp, unless again, you're from Canada, you don't have that visa stamp. Again, make sure you're not uploading the admission stamp of your passport, but the actual visa that's in your passport. There's a section just for previously authorized CPT or OPT I-20s. You just include pages 1 and 2. You don't include the information page, that third page of the I-20. And then there's a section for the OPT endorsed I-20 that you'll have to upload there. There is an additional information section for uploading your previously issued I-20s. So again, all the I-20s that you have in your possession, you'll still be including that in this online application. And also there are character limits to the fields of the online application. It's a 40 character limit. So if your name exceeds that 40 character limit, you'll have to upload a letter explaining which data fields you couldn't complete because your information was longer than the character limit provided. So you'd be uploading that letter in this additional information section. And then again, you'll be paying the application fee online. Double check the fee amount at the time that you're going to be submitting the online application. And then again, you have to use a US financial institution when making the payment. All right. So let's get to your questions. And I promise I will answer all of your questions. So let me stop sharing here. I think some of you use the chat. If you use the chat to ask a question, please re-ask that question using the Q&A. And let's get to this. So after we're graduating this quarter, is there any way to work in the US between the last date of exams and the day after conferral? So the short answer is no. If you're going to do CPT during the fall quarter, that's fine. And you can actually request. We had students who will say, do I have to wait for my CPT endorsed I-20 before I mail my application off to for OPT? No. So if you mail your application off for OPT, but then decide to do CPT, that's fine. I wouldn't wait to mail your application to USCIS if you're just waiting for a CPT endorsed I-20. But your CPT has to end on the last day of finals. The only way to work between the last day of finals and the start of your I'm sorry, let me back up. The only way to work between the last day of finals and your program end date is through pre-completion OPT. However, to do that, you should have timelined that out, because what you don't want is two OPT applications at USCIS at the same time. So if you think I'll submit my pre-OPT and then my post-OPT at the same time to see if I can get the pre-OPT to bridge the gap between last day of finals and the program end date, it's not going to work. USCIS will cancel one of those applications and process the other. We don't know which one they'll cancel, so they could end up canceling your post-OPT, which would be horrendous. So at this point, it's too late. Just enjoy that time off between the last day of finals and when you can start working again. My F1 visa expires on December 13th. Can I stay longer? So you can apply for OPT even if your visa has expired. And you can remain in the US on an expired F1 visa as long as you're maintaining your status. So you're maintaining your status now because you're enrolled in classes and you're going to class. And then once you've reached the program end date on your I-20, you're in status because you have a pending application for OPT. And then once you get your EAD card, you're maintaining status by following the rules under OPT. So the rules under OPT is that you're in a job related to your field of study, you're working at least 20 hours a week, which is considered full-time, and you've reported that employment as full-time in the Scvp portal. And also your address, your physical location address is up to date in the Scvp portal. When the time is right, could you clarify when it's possible to travel outside the US? For example, can we travel while the OPT application is under review? So we do not advise that you be outside of the US after your degree conferral date with your OPT application pending. You can travel outside the US before your degree conferral date, the program end date on your I-20. But once you reach the program end date on your I-20, your F1 status on paper looks like it's done. And at that point, after the program end date on your I-20, the degree conferral date, you can't re-enter the US without having the EAD card. So at that point, if you're outside the US, you would have to have a friend or family member, whoever received that EAD card to mail to you overseas. The problem with that is if there's something wrong with your application and it gets rejected, or you need to reapply for whatever reason during the grace period after degree conferral, you can't do that from outside the US. And because you've reached the program end date by being outside the US, your F1 status is done. So you've now lost out on OPT. So by being outside of the US after the program end date on your I-20, the degree conferral date, you're taking a huge risk. And if something goes wrong with your OPT application, you will have lost out on your OPT before it's even started. So we do not advise that you be outside of the US after your program end date while your OPT application is pending. For students who already have work authorization issued while waiting for a green card, do they still need to apply for OPT? The concern is that the green card will not be out until the conferral date, so not sure if the student is eligible to stay in the country after conferral. So there's some stuff to unpack there. So let me answer it this way. While you're waiting for your green card to be approved, you should be maintaining your F1 status. You don't necessarily have to if you're consulting with an immigration attorney, you want to verify that, but then you don't have a safety net status to fall back on. So if by maintaining your status, you're applying for OPT, then that's what you should do. But then let's say you get the employment authorization document that you get as part of the green card application, then you will want to use that instead of OPT because you're on your way to getting a green card. If you do that, you have to notify us through Bechtel Connect that you've started using a benefit of the green card application. And now you are no longer in F1 status and we have to close out your SEVIS record. So I hope that answers your question. If not, feel free to follow up. What are the international travel restrictions during this process? Again, you can leave the US as long as you come back. If you follow our advice, come back before January 6th, the program end date on your I-20. We don't advise that you're outside the US after the degree conferral without that EAD card. If I change the degree program before graduation, quitting a PhD and graduate with an MS, do I need to submit a separate application for that as well? You want to be very sure when you're applying for OPT that the correct degree level is on your I-20. So if you submitted an OPT application and your degree level on the I-20 is PhD, but that's no longer the case, and you didn't request your degree level to be changed to the master's degree, that's a huge mistake. So when you get the I-20 for us, verify that all the information on the I-20 is accurate. That includes your degree level. And if it's not, then you have to change your degree. You have to request us to change your degree level first before applying for OPT. For a PhD student, if I fail to submit thesis before deadline of this quarter, can I resubmit OPT? So this is only available to PhD students. If you need additional quarters to finish your PhD degree because of you have to rewrite or do something with your thesis or dissertation, you can leave your OPT application in place and then and you've mailed it off to USCIS and then finish your PhD degree while you're on OPT. That's okay. And a lot of PhD students choose to do that because they've already have a job lined up. There's just a couple things they need to do to their thesis or dissertation to graduate. And so they will let their OPT application be processed by USCIS and then finish their degree while they're under OPT. That's fine for PhD students. For master's students and for undergrad students, that's not the case because if you're in a situation where you aren't graduating when you thought you did, it's because you've missed out on some academic courses that you have to retake or Yeah, and then that's a whole other story. So what I just described is specific to PhD students. For OPT purposes, does self-employment entrepreneurship count as unemployment or employment? So you can be self-employed under OPT, and you can report that as full-time employment as long as you're doing that self-employment 20 hours a week. In the Scvp portal, there'll be a box that you can check for self-employment. It'll gray out the employer information, or put your name there. So even if it's just a startup or a company that you're working on isn't incorporated, you can list that as self-employment. What you do want to do is keep track of how you're spending those 20 hours a week. And again, USCIS considers 20 hours of work per week as full-time employment. That stops the unemployment clock. But if you ever get asked when you apply for a change of status or visa renewal, or at the port of entry that you're in fact are employed and working, you'll have a journal that you can point to that will break down how you were spending those 20 hours a week. Should we request today if we, okay, yeah, we talked about After receiving the EAD card, can we travel outside of the US before the start date of employment on the EAD card? Yes. So once you've received that EAD card after the program end date on your I-20, you can travel outside the US and re-enter using that EAD card along with your other travel documents. That's fine. What is applying for graduation? So if you haven't done so already, that's the first step before you can request for the OPT endorsed I-20 from Bechtel through Bechtel Connect. You have to apply to graduate through Access. That is available to you now. So if you haven't applied to graduate yet, you should do that. And then go to Bechtel Connect and request your OPT endorsed I-20. Once we mail the I-20 to USCIS, I don't have I-20 doc at hand until they return it to me. No, you are not mailing any original documents other than the I-765 that you completed and signed. All the other documents, the post-completion endorsed I-20, the previous I-20s, the bio page on your passport, the visa page in your passport, all are photocopies. You're not mailing any of the original documents other than the I-765 and that G1145 form. Which one should we prefer, online or paper-based? So again, we're advising the paper-based form because we haven't built out our advising on the online form, but the students that I've spoken to that I've used the online form found it pretty easy to use. You just want to review that section that I had, make sure you pay attention to the warnings. If you're gonna do the online filing rather than the paper-based form. And the I-765 that you're completing online is gonna look a little different than the paper version. How far back do the previous I-20s have to go? What if we don't have all the ones we had from a previous degree 5+ years ago? So again, USCIS is mainly interested in the I-20s that were endorsed for CPT or previous OPT. Otherwise, the rule of thumb is to include photocopies of all the previous I-20s you have in your possession. If you have I-20s that you don't have in your possession, you won't include those I-20s with your application. Do the photocopies for I-20 and passport bio, etc., have to be colored or black and white? Either. It doesn't matter to USCIS if it's in color or if it's in black and white. But don't use staples, just paper clips. Is it okay if the F1 visa page is expired? That is perfectly fine as long as you've been maintaining your F1 status. You can apply with an expired F1 visa. You'll still be including a copy of it. My I-20s are missing one signature in 2017, which didn't cause me any issues while entering the US at that time, but I want to make sure something like this would cause a problem for my OPT application. No, not if it's an I-20 from 2017. You can leave it unsigned. Do you have any idea where to find information on how to make an order, account number, bank for people who don't have checks? So go to whatever US institution bank, US bank that you have, the Stanford Federal Credit Union, Chase, or wherever, Wells Fargo, wherever you're banking. If you walk in there, you can ask for a money order or a cashier's check. They're both the same thing. There's usually some fee involved that you have to pay. And then they either take the money out of your account right away or you pay them the $410. And they'll issue that to you. And then sometimes there aren't memo lines on that. You'll have to find a space to write your I-94 number on that cashier's check or money order. In the application of OPT and Bechtel Connect, should we take into account the STEM extension period and the recommended end date? No. So the STEM extension is going to be a separate application that you will be doing 100 days before your OPT ends. You do not apply for post-OPT and the STEM extension at the same time. So the dates that you take into consideration, the start date and the end date of employment, will be just for the 12 months of post-completion OPT. If you used any pre-completion OPT, you deduct that from the post-completion, from the 12 months. Similarly, how big of a deal is it not to have a photocopy of a previous EAD? So that you will note on your cover letter. If you had an EAD card before and you don't have that anymore to photocopy and include it with your application, you will note that on your cover letter. I received an EAD card for a prior post-completion OPT or whatever it was. I was authorized for these dates, if you know what those dates are, and I don't have access to this card anymore. So you'll note that on your cover letter. When is the not being outside USA period? Can I apply and leave and return before the start date? So again, you have to be in the US when you apply for OPT. When you mail your application to USCIS, you have to be in the US. If you're going to file online, you have to file online from within the US. Then let's say you want to go home for the winter break and, I don't know, see your family before Christmas. You can do that as long as you're able to come back a few days before the program end date on your I-20. We don't advise that you be outside of the US after degree conferral date / program end date on your I-20 without the EAD card. So if you have a pending OPT application, you should be in the US after the degree conferral date. Well, a few days before. If one got rejected, if an OPT application got rejected at the beginning of March, you can still reapply for OPT, but the grace period is ending in 7 days. Is that okay? Do you have to leave the US? I'm not sure what that's referring to. This presentation is for fall graduates. It sounds like you might have been a spring graduate, and that's a pretty serious issue. So you want to meet with an international student advisor for that question. When are we allowed to request a social security number? If you have not requested a social security number at all while you were a student at Stanford, then you can use the I-765 to make that request for a social security number. If not, then you're going to wait until you get your EAD card, and within 30 days of your start date of employment, you are requesting a social security number. So either through the I-765 or after you get the EAD card and have a job offer. I am expecting to graduate in March. Will the application be format? It not very different, but don't know. These are subject to change, so I can't speak for what this application is going to look like in March. Do we have to be in the US as we're waiting for the OPT to be processed and for the EAD card? Yes. So no before the program end date on your I-20. Yes, a few days before and after the program end date on your I-20. So January 6th. You should be in the US if your OPT application hasn't processed by USCIS and you don't have the EAD card. I'm going to stop answering that question because hopefully it's clear. Just to make it clear, no information about the employer will be required before you receive the EAD card, right? Correct. You will not be entering employment information when you're making the request for OPT. OPT is not employment-based, and you'll be providing that information to the US government once you get the EAD card and on or a few days after the start date on the EAD card through something called the Scvp Portal. We have videos about that portal on our webpage. My husband is with an F2 visa outside of the US now. Can I request the new I-20 with OPT endorsement before he is back? Would that be a problem at immigration? No, that's not a problem for him on an F2. So he is dependent on your status, and as long as your status is fine, then so is your husband's F2 status. Can we leave the US after sending the OPT application? You can, as long as you're back, I would say at least by January 1st or 2nd. I think I said I wasn't going to answer that question anymore. That was pretty specific. Once I submit the I-765, I cannot ask for CPT. You can ask for CPT even after you've mailed off your application to USCIS. That's fine. That hasn't been an issue for students. How do I know if my I-20 is OPT endorsed or not? Oh, that's a good question. So you will get an OPT endorsed I-20 from us. You have to mail your application to USCIS within 30. So let me back up. That OPT endorsement of your I-20 is good for 30 days. USCIS can't receive your application if that endorsement has expired. They will reject your application. So that endorsement is good only for 30 days. For the most part, my colleague who processes those, once the endorsement is made, she'll print it out. If she prints it out a few days after the endorsement is made, that date on the I-20 would not accurately reflect when that endorsement was made. So mentally, I would, when I receive that OPT endorsed I-20, I would, in my mind, be thinking as if that endorsement was made 7 days prior to when that I-20 was signed. And that's just to play it safe. But again, if you're going to make the OPT endorsement request today, you can't mail your application to USCIS before October 8. October 8 is the first day you can mail your application to USCIS. I hope that's clear. Since we must use a credit card to pay online filing, won't it be risky in case the card gets denied? So again, this is one of those things where we're still building out our advising on the online filing. I have not seen issues with submitting payments online, and I would be surprised if they don't run the credit card when you make the request. So if there's a problem with the credit card, I would think it gets denied right away, because that's usually how things work now. Otherwise, there should be an option to do like a direct payment through your, where the money is withdrawn from a checking account. Can we go back home and come back to the US between last days of finals and end of program date? So again, you shouldn't be planning on coming, if you're gonna leave and come back before the program end date, before January 6th, you shouldn't be arriving on January 6th. That's on paper, looks like the last day of your F1 status. You wanna build in the potential for flight delays. So I would be coming back on January 1st or 2nd, the latest. How long can we stay in the US after degree conferral? 60 days. So you can remain in the US on a pending OPT application, even if it's been more than 60 days after degree conferral. If you haven't applied for OPT, then the 60-day grace period is meant for you to get yourself ready to depart the US, and you have to be outside the US before the end of the 60-day grace period. Otherwise, if you applied for OPT, let's say in December, and now it's into April and you're still waiting for your EAD card, that's okay. You can be in the US after the 60-day grace period on a pending OPT application, as long as it's pending with USCIS. We talked about that already. If the current travel bans are in place, will the exemption for students still be valid in case we go back home and want to come back to the US before the program end date in January? That's a good point. So in November, we're going to find out how travel restrictions are changing. So it looks, although it hasn't been officially announced, it looks like they're going to lift these travel restrictions, but you'll have to prove vaccination and also be tested like a day before you get on the flight for COVID-19 and a few days after you come back. So I can't really answer that question about travel restrictions until we get closer to end of November. Just don't know what that's going to look like. After receiving the EAD card, can we travel out of the US before the start date of employment in the EAD card? Yes, after you receive the EAD card, you can travel outside the US. You need that EAD card to be able to re-enter the US. So if I finish the thesis on OPT, so PhD, if I finish my PhD thesis on OPT, will the time be counted as unemployment days? Yes, if you're not working full-time, at least 20 hours a week, and you're on OPT finishing your PhD degree, then yeah, those would be counted towards your unemployment days. But for the PhD students who do that, who finish their degree on OPT, they are doing that because they have a job lined up and they're already working, probably more than 20 hours a week. So they are working and finishing their degree. Can you travel with EAD card, but when F1 visa is expired? The F1 visa has to be valid for entry to the US. So just having an EAD card alone and an expired visa is not enough to get into the US. Your visa has to be valid. So you would have to renew your visa, which you can do while you're on OPT, in order to come back to the US. A follow-up question on PhDs who do not graduate after applying for OPT. My understanding is that my I-20 will have January 6th as end of program as a result of applying for OPT. Do I need to request an extension for I-20 in this case? No, you are not, as a PhD student who's finishing their degree while on OPT, you do not file for an extension of your I-20. On your I-20, it's going to look like that your program completed on January 6th. It's just that that you have to do it that way in order to get OPT. If you're a master's student or an undergrad student and you weren't able to complete your degree by January 6th, then you do have to extend your I-20. And hopefully way before then, if you did submit an application for OPT to USCIS, you've withdrawn that application. Again, that's for masters and undergrad students, but you should really be talking to an international student advisor if you're in that situation. If my F1 visa has already expired and if I travel outside after I get my EAD card, can I re-enter the US with my EAD without? No, you have to have a valid visa to re-enter the US. An EAD card alone is not enough to enter the United States. You have to have valid travel signature on your I-20, your passport has to be valid, and your visa has to be valid. If we don't use the 90 days of unemployment in the first year of OPT, can we use those days during the STEM extension? Yes. So you're given another 60 days of unemployment under the STEM extension to add to whatever unemployment days you didn't use while under post-OPT. So if you didn't use any of the 90 days, then you get 60 more days under the STEM extension. So now you have 150 days of unemployment. Can I return to the US exactly on January 6th? No, January 6th is your last day. If you enter on January 6th, Customs Border Protection Officer is going to look at you funny and ask, why the heck are you coming back on January 6th, the last day of your program, the last day of your program on your I-20. And you might be denied entry, or worse, they might enter you on a tourist visa just to get you out of the airport. In that case, by entering in the US on a different status, you've ended your F1 status and ended your OPT. Do not enter the US on January 6th. You should be coming in, like I said, I would advise you to come in on the 1st or 2nd. And somebody's really worried about their spouse on the F2. That's very kind of you. I know some married couples where that would be an issue. Someone asking me to explain more about PhD students finishing their thesis on OPT. If that wasn't clear, go ahead and ask me again. I feel like I've explained that. If we apply for OPT, our dependents that are an F2 visa have to do anything related to their visa status. They maintain their F2 visa. They maintain their F2 status as long as you're maintaining your F1 status. There is nothing that they need to do when you file for OPT as an F1. I was issued a social security number in 2003. Is that still valid? Yes. Once you get a social security number, that social security number is yours for the rest of your life. You should not be getting a new and different social security number. If you do, that was a huge mistake and you have to get that rectified. Sorry for not being clear. If you get rejected during the grace period, you can reapply for OPT, but that process time is longer than the grace period. Is that okay? Yes. So as long as you're in the US, you haven't left the US. So you're in the US, for some reason, your OPT application gets rejected. Maybe your signature went over on the I-765, touched one of the boxes, one of the lines of the box. Your application gets rejected, but you're in the grace period. You can still ask us to re-endorse your I-20, which you have to do, right? Because the endorsement's only good, the original endorsement's only good for 30 days. Then we re-endorse your I-20, you apply again during the 60-day grace period. It's just now you have to wait to start working because you've reapplied for OPT. And you're waiting for USCIS to process your OPT application. Hypothetically, if an OPT application got rejected at the beginning of March, you can still reapply for OPT, but the grace period is ending in 7 days. Is that okay? Do you have to leave the US? So again, you can apply within the 60-day grace period. Once you've reached the end of that 60-day grace period, you can no longer apply for OPT. Is degree conferral equal to the end date of I-20? Yes. If it's not, if for some reason you're graduating early and you have a current I-20 that has like a June 2022 program end date, when you apply for post-OPT as a fall graduate, we shorten the end date on your I-20. So it will say January 6, 2022. If my partner who has F2 visa wants to work in the US, can we apply for switching his status to J2 while I'm applying for OPT? No. No. Because that means you're switching from F to J status. And then you're no longer eligible for OPT because there's no such thing as OPT for the J status. What if I graduated in summer quarter, but my I-20 is a spring quarter graduation date? That is a huge problem. That is a very significant problem because that means you should not be in the US. So you need to get a hold of an international student advisor and figure that out. I'm not sure what you're doing in this workshop. If we don't work immediately after EAD start date, just to take a few days off, do those days count towards unemployment days? Yes. So in that kind of a situation, you've worked out a start date with your employer. So let's say the start date on your EAD card you put as January 10th, but you wanted some time off, so you negotiated a start date of January 20th. So those 10 days between the start date on your EAD card and the start date of your employment would be counted towards the unemployment days. Can we volunteer somewhere in order to avoid using our unemployment days? You can. Your employment does not have to be paid under OPT, has to be at least 20 hours a week, has to be in your field of study, can't be some random volunteer job, and you have to report that in the Scvp portal. Okay, as last question, unless somebody has more, and there's 15 of you left in here, so you hung in there. As PhD student, can I finish thesis on OPT and at the same time on a research assistantship, so it won't count as unemployment days? Okay, actually that brings up a good point, and I forgot to mention this. So if you're gonna go the route as a PhD student of finishing your degree while on OPT during the winter quarter, you are not eligible for employment-based funding from the university. And that's because you have to have work authorization now that you're on OPT to be employed. And so you wouldn't be eligible for employment until you got the EAD card and reached the start date of employment on that EAD card. So yes, you could do a research assistantship during the winter quarter while you're finishing up your degree, but you couldn't start that research assistantship until you got the EAD card and reached the start date of employment on the EAD card. And then you could be a research assistant Until then, you can't be employed, you can't be receiving any employment-based funding from your department. All right, there are no more questions on the Q&A. So again, we'll be back on October 8th. That'll be the 90-day mark before degree conferral date. That'll be the first day that you can mail in your application to USCIS or submit it online. I will not necessarily be talking at you the whole time. It's going to be a slightly different format. Unmute everybody, and I'll be going through the application. Again, document by document through the I-765. We're all checking to make sure our application is correct before mailing it off. And that'll be what October 8th will look like. And hopefully it'll be fun. I don't know. Anyway, thanks for coming. Thanks for joining. And we'll see you on October 8th. Take care.